From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
It is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and the crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
Those are the words of the great abolitionist and writer Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery around 1818. He died in 1895, a fact President Donald Trump might have missed.
I am very proud now that we have a museum in the National Mall where people can learn about Reverend King, so many other things. Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I notice.
Does Donald Trump think Frederick Douglass is still alive? We'll set the record straight with Douglass's great-great-great-grandson, Kenneth Morris Jr., then to Yemen and growing questions about the first covert counterterrorism operation approved by President Donald Trump. Authorities say it was a success, but human rights groups say up to 24 civilians were killed, including a newborn baby and an American 8-year-old girl, Nawar al-Awlaki, the daughter of the U.S.-born cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed in Yemen by a U.S. drone strike in 2011.
It's hard to ever call something a complete success when you have the loss of life or people injured. But I think when you look at the totality of what was gained to prevent the future loss of life here in America and against our people and our institutions and probably throughout the world in terms of what some of these individuals could have done, I think it is a successful operation by all standards.
We'll speak with a human rights advocate who's talked to residents of the village that was raided, and with The Intercept's Jeremy Scahill. Then a transgender reporter at the public radio show Marketplace wrote a blog post about journalistic neutrality under Trump and found himself out of a job. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a rare move on Capitol Hill, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell scheduled an unusually early vote this morning at 6:30 a.m. to advance billionaire Betsy DeVos's nomination for Education Secretary to the full Senate. The early morning straight party cloture vote dealt with a key Senate hurdle required to advance DeVos's nomination to the Senate floor. The full Senate slated to vote as early as Monday. DeVos is facing escalating opposition from lawmakers and education advocates. She's a longtime backer of charter schools and vouchers for private and religious schools. She and her husband have also invested in a student debt collection agency that does business with the Education Department. On Thursday, parents and teachers flooded the Senate phone system, calling lawmakers to demand they oppose her confirmation. Around 1 p.m., Republican Nevada Senator Dean Heller tweeted, quote, "We're experiencing heavy call volumes in all our offices. Staff is answering as many as possible. Please continue calling to get through," unquote. This week, two Republican lawmakers, Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, announced plans to vote against DeVos, leaving Senate Republicans one vote short of confirming her. If the Senate vote is 50-50, Vice President Mike Pence would then cast the deciding vote, an event that's never happened to any other presidential nominee in history. If only one more Republican senator decides to vote against DeVos, her confirmation will be rejected. This means the full Senate will not move forward on Jeff Sessions' Attorney General confirmation vote, because if he's confirmed, he will no longer be a senator, which would mean one less vote for DeVos. Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, is facing widespread criticism after she attempted to justify President Trump's executive order banning people from 7 majority Muslim countries from entering the U.S. by inventing a terrorist attack that never happened. This is Conway speaking to MSNBC's Chris Matthews.
I bet it's brand new information to people that President Obama had a 6-month ban on the Iraqi refugee program after 2 Iraqis came here to this country, were radicalized, and they were the masterminds behind the Bowling Green massacre. Most people don't know that because it didn't get covered.
The Washington Post reports there was no terrorist attack carried out in Bowling Green, Kentucky by Iraqis or anyone else. There were 2 Iraqi men living in Bowling Green who were arrested in 2011 on charges of having attempted to send money and weapons to al-Qaeda in Iraq. The Washington Post also reports the Obama administration never imposed a ban on Iraqi resettlement, contrary to Conway's claims. The Obama administration did implement a more extensive screening procedure for Iraqi refugees after the 2011 arrests. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer falsely claimed Thursday that Iran attacked a U.S. naval vessel, which, if it were true, would constitute an act of war. In fact, Spicer was referring to a Houthi rebel attack against a Saudi ship off the coast of Yemen on Monday. This is White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
I think General Flynn was really clear yesterday that Iran has violated the joint resolution, that Iran's additional hostile actions that it took against our Navy vessel are ones that we are very clear are not going to sit by and take.
This false claim comes after National Security Advisor Michael Flynn condemned Iran's recent ballistic missile test launch and said the U.S. is putting Iran on notice. This morning, President Trump tweeted, quote, "Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them. Not me," he tweeted. Many experts, as well as Iran's foreign ministry, say the missile test does not violate the terms of a 2015 UN Security Council resolution. The test also does not violate the terms of the landmark 2015 nuclear deal between Iran, the U.S., and other countries. The White House is expected to impose additional sanctions against Iranian individuals and entities over the missile test. Meanwhile, Reuters reports the U.S. Treasury Department has eased sanctions against Russian intelligence agency FSB. The sanctions were imposed by President Obama over the alleged Russian hacking of the U.S. election in order to help Donald Trump win. Defense Secretary James Mad Dog Mattis is visiting South Korea and Japan today. Speaking in Seoul, he issued a warning to North Korea.
Any attack on the United States or on our allies will be defeated, and any use of nuclear weapons would be met with a response that would be effective and overwhelming.
Trump administration issued an unexpected statement Thursday to the Israeli government following the announcement that Israel plans to build the first entirely new Jewish-only settlement in the occupied West Bank in 20 years. In response, the White House said, quote, "While we don't believe the existence of settlements is an impediment to peace, the construction of new settlements or the expansion of existing settlements beyond their current borders may not be helpful in achieving that goal," unquote. Trump's pick for U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, is a longtime supporter of Israel's settlements. For years, Friedman has served as president of American Friends of Beit El institutions, which has raised millions of dollars to support illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. Arizona Senator John McCain called Australian Ambassador Joe Hockey Thursday in efforts to smooth over relations with Australia after President Trump insulted Australia's Prime Minister and hung up on him over the weekend. On Saturday, Trump complained to Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull about the terms of a refugee deal between the U.S. and Australia and told Turnbull that their conversation was the worst call by far that he'd had with a foreign leader that day. Under the Obama administration, the United States had pledged to accept and resettle over 1,200 refugees from a detention center in Australia. President Trump has selected Gina Haspel to be the new deputy director of the CIA. The Intercept reports Haspel was directly involved in the CIA's torture program under George W. Bush. She was responsible for running a secret CIA black site in Thailand where prisoners were waterboarded and tortured. The Intercept also reports Haspel played a role in the 2005 destruction of 2 interrogation videotapes that depicted the torture of prisoners. The Wall Street Journal's reported President Trump is slated to roll back the Dodd-Frank financial reform bill enacted after the 2008 financial crisis. The Journal reports Trump may sign an executive action to dismantle the financial regulations as early as today. President Trump spoke at a national prayer breakfast Thursday at which he vowed to destroy the Johnson Amendment, a 1954 provision that prohibits tax-exempt religious or charitable organizations from, quote, directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for elective public office, unquote. The provision does not prohibit political activity by churches or religious organizations overall, but it does place some limits on the role of religious institutions in U.S. elections. White evangelical Protestants have long pushed for the amendment to be repealed. This is President Trump.
Among those freedoms is the right to worship according to our own beliefs. That is why I will get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment and allow our representatives of faith to speak freely and without fear of retribution. I will do that, remember.
In New York City, more than 1,000 Yemeni American-owned bodegas went on strike Thursday to protest President Trump's executive order banning people from Yemen and 6 other majority Muslim countries from entering the United States. Thousands of these bodega owners and workers, as well as their family members, rallied at Borough Hall Thursday evening.
Rahman. So I do work in a grocery store, and we close to come out here. It is our duty to come so Donald Trump can see what we are about. This is wrong what he's doing. It's wrong. It's wrong.
After widespread protests, Uber CEO Travis Kalanick has stepped down from Trump's Economic Advisory Council. Over the last week, thousands of people deleted the Uber app from their phones after the company turned off surge pricing at JFK Airport Saturday in a move many saw as an attempt to break the New York Taxi Workers Alliance strike on picking up travelers from JFK Airport in solidarity with the massive protests that had erupted there over Trump's immigration ban. On Trump's inauguration day, activists chained themselves to each other to shut down the headquarters of Uber in San Francisco. And the magazines The New Yorker and Vanity Fair have pulled out of White House correspondents' dinner parties amidst President Trump's proclaimed war with the media. The New Yorker has canceled its annual kickoff party, while Vanity Fair has said it will not co-sponsor the dinner's exclusive after-party. Comedian Samantha Bee has announced she'll hold an alternative event the same night as the April dinner. In 2011, President Trump, then a reality TV star who had already begun floating the idea of running for president, was eviscerated by comedian Seth Meyers during the correspondents' dinner.
And then, of course, there's Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been saying that he will run for president as a Republican, which is surprising since I just assumed he was running as a joke. Donald Trump often appears on Fox, which is ironic because a fox often appears on Donald Trump's head. Donald Trump said recently he has a great relationship with the blacks, though unless the blacks are a family of white people, I bet he's mistaken.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today with the good news that President Donald Trump opened Black History Month by mentioning the renowned abolitionist Frederick Douglass. The bad news is he doesn't seem to realize that he's dead. This is Donald Trump speaking at the Black History Month event at the White House on Wednesday.
I am very proud now that we have a museum in the National Mall where people can learn about Reverend King, so many other things. Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I notice.
Frederick Douglass was born into slavery around 1818. He died in 1895. Trump's comments about Douglass led to follow-up questions from reporters for White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
About Frederick Douglass being recognized more and more. Do you have any idea what specifically he was referring to?
Well, I think there's contributions. I think he wants to highlight the contributions that he has made, and I think through a lot of the actions and statements that he's going to make, I think the contributions of Frederick Douglass will become more and more.
In a minute, we'll set the record straight when we're joined by the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass. But first, let's turn to the words of Douglass himself. On July 5, 1852, in Rochester, New York, Douglas gave one of his most famous speeches, The Meaning of July 4th for the Negro. He was addressing the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. This is an excerpt of James Earl Jones reading the historic address during a performance of Howard Zinn's Voices of the People's History of the United States.
It is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and the crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
Well, for more, we're joined by the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass, Kenneth Morris, Jr. He's also the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington and the founder and president of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. Kenneth Morris, Jr. joins us from Irvine, California. Welcome to Democracy Now! Your thoughts on Donald Trump's words, the President of the United States, about your great-great-great-grandfather?
Well, I'm in California, so when I woke up and my phone was ringing off of the hook and I heard what he had said, my first reaction was, wow, the gift of Frederick Douglass has been given again on the first day of Black History Month. Last year, on Black History Month, February 1st, Google honored Frederick Douglass with its Google Doodle of the Day, and that act introduced the legacy of Frederick Douglass and his life and contributions to the country and to the world, to millions of people. And then when I heard that Donald Trump said that Frederick Douglass has done an amazing job, I thought, okay, well, this is great. This gives us an opportunity to be able to introduce and talk about his legacy and his life to a wider audience.
Amazingly, Frederick Douglass was trending at some point on Thursday. He was as popular on social media as Beyonce and her pregnancy announcement.
I have two young daughters, and they were very proud that Frederick Douglass was #1 over Beyonce.
So this is an incredible educational moment. Can you talk about Frederick Douglass's life and what people around the world should know about him?
Well, both of my ancestors, Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, were born into slavery. And they were born into the most horrific conditions that a human being could be subjected to. But yet, through the power of education, both of my ancestors understood from a very young age that education equals freedom. And for Frederick Douglass, at the age of 9 years old, he was sent from the eastern shore of Maryland, where he was born on a plantation, to go to Baltimore to be the house servant for his master's brother. And when he got there, his slave mistress had never had slaves before, and she didn't know that it was illegal to teach him to read and write. So she began to teach young Frederick his ABCs. But when his master found out about it, he got angry and he forbade it. And he looked at Frederick and he looked at his wife, Sophia, and he said, you cannot teach a slave how to read and write, because if you do, it will unfit him to be a slave. And Frederick looked at his master and he heard that message loud and clear, and he understood right then and there that education would be his pathway to freedom. At the age of 20 in 1838, he would have the courage to run away from slavery. He would eventually settle in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And instead of just saying, I'm free now, I'll start a family and get a job, he looked back and he saw that there was this institution of legalized slavery that needed to be dismantled. And he, along with the other abolitionists, got to work and worked on ending slavery. He became an advisor to President Abraham Lincoln and then a statesman, the first African-American to be nominated for vice president. He was consul general to Haiti. And his contributions really tell us that he was a true American hero.
Your family responded to Donald Trump's words by coming up with, a list of 15 points that you feel Douglass has done a great job at, as President Trump put it. Yeah,
absolutely. We wanted to look at and highlighting some points that would be relevant today. You know, you played the 4th of July speech in the opening piece there, and when you listen to Frederick Douglass's words, they are as relevant today as they were when he wrote them 150, 170 years ago. And the work that we do at our organization is about teaching the next generation of leaders about his life, because when you look at where he came from and what he was able to overcome, it becomes a tangible example to a young person that if he was able to overcome slavery, and it doesn't get any worse than that, then there's nothing in their lives that they can't do when they face challenges and obstacles. And we've been working for the past 8 years at our organization to bring the legacies of Booker T. Washington and Frederick Douglass into the classroom, and working on human rights issues, working on issues of human trafficking, labor trafficking, child sex trafficking. So it really was an opportunity for us to list those bullet points of some really great things that he did for our country and for the world.
Kenneth Morris, the property in Maryland where Frederick Douglass was tortured and beaten, Mount Misery,
yes,
because he was considered a troublesome slave, was bought right around the beginning of the Iraq War by, at the time, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Frederick Douglass fled, went north, went into the, took refuge in the printing press building here in New York City of a free black man born in Connecticut named David Ruggles. So Ruggles had this printing press, and your great-great-great-grandfather, Frederick Douglass, founded the North Star newspaper. Can you talk more about that? Why these men saw media as their form of liberation?
When Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery around the age of 22 years old, he saw that this new emerging technology of photography would be something that would help him make his arguments for liberation and equality in the same way that his writings and his speeches would. So he was somebody that understood from a very young age that you could use the communication tools that you have at your disposal to be able to communicate a message to a wider audience. And when he started the North Star newspaper, it became the leading abolitionist voice, and it was where he could talk about the inhumanity of slavery. He could tell the world, tell the country about what he went through on Mount Misery when the slave breaker Edward Covey tried to break his spirit and tried to break him down so that he would be at the level of a brute. But he didn't allow that to happen, and he had this spirit that just rose up inside of him. And he and Covey, if you know the story, they had an epic 2-hour battle in which Frederick struck his own blow for his own liberation. So the North Star newspaper was a place where he could go, and many other abolitionists, to be able to talk about slavery and really shape the public consciousness on what slavery was really about, because those that were pro-slavery and the federal government, who made it illegal to teach a slave how to read and write, put it out there that these were Africans, that they were savages, they were better off in slavery, and at least they were getting some level of care. And Frederick Douglass, when he came out and when he wrote, he shattered that notion. He shattered the notion in the public consciousness that slavery was not something that was a good thing for enslaved Africans.
Can you talk about Frederick Douglass's relationship with Abraham Lincoln?
Well, they met on at least 3 occasions. And the occasion that I like to talk about most when we're talking to young people, when we're talking to students, was the 3rd visit to the White House, which was right after Lincoln's inauguration. And Frederick Douglass was front and center when Lincoln delivered his inaugural address. And then after that speech, Douglass was invited to the White House for the gala, or as my daughters would say, the after party. And when he got there, they wouldn't let him in. They wouldn't let him in because he was black. It didn't matter that he had written 3 best-selling autobiographies, that he was the leader of the abolitionist movement. None of that mattered. And when word got back to President Lincoln that he was outside, he said, "Oh, no, you come on in, let him in." And as they're walking toward each other, and Douglass was very tall, as was Lincoln, and if you can imagine these imposing figures just towering over the guests, and President Lincoln points out, and he said, "Here comes my friend Frederick Douglass. I want to know what you thought about my speech, because there's no person's opinion that I value more than yours." And Douglass said that it was a sacred effort.
Finally, Kenneth Morris, you're leading up to the bicentennial of your great-great-grandfather Frederick Douglass's birth, February 2018. You have written to the White House, to the Trump administration, to somehow be involved. Is that right? Have you gotten a response?
We have not written to the White House yet, but we're working on a project called 1 Million Abolitionists, and we're going to produce or publish a special edition of Frederick Douglass's narrative for his bicentennial. And Brian Stevenson, whom I know you've had on the show before, wrote an introduction, and what he is doing is connecting Frederick Douglass's work and his writings and making that direct connection through Jim Crow, through all the way up to mass incarceration. And we want to inspire 1 million young people with Douglass's words, so we're going to give away that book, put it into the hands of young people everywhere. And leading up to 2018 and that bicentennial, we're going to offer social service projects so our young people can get socially active, get in their communities, and work on these issues that they're most passionate about. Because, you know, we're talking about issues of systemic racism. And we want, in the same way that Frederick Douglass heard his master say, education will unfit him to be a slave, we want to unfit young people to be oppressed, to look at how media shapes their consciousness and who they are, and how these systemic issues affect them, and issues of lack of opportunity and lack of education. We want to inspire and lift up 1 million Frederick Douglasses. Frederick Douglass is famous for saying in 1857, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." If Frederick Douglass were alive today, which the president may well think he is, what would he say to President Trump? Well, we know that Frederick Douglass always spoke the truth. And I imagine if he were here today, he would be railing against injustice. He would be railing against inequality, and he would hold all of us accountable, but especially the administration, to make sure that the poor and the oppressed and people of color and every American is lifted up. You know, Booker T. Washington said, if you want to lift up yourself, lift up with someone else. And I know Frederick Douglass would be talking to Donald Trump in the way that Frederick Douglass talked. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing some history lessons with us. Kenneth Morris, Jr., founder and president of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass and the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, we find out what happened in Yemen. How did an infant and an 8-year-old American citizen die attacked in a raid? Stay with us.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe, says I, am standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead, says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, performed by the late, great Paul Robeson. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn now to Yemen, growing questions about the first covert counterterrorism operation approved by President Donald Trump. The Pentagon now acknowledges civilians were killed Sunday when members of the Navy SEAL Team 6 joined with commandos from the United Arab Emirates to raid a Yemeni village where members of al-Qaeda were said to live. Initially, the Pentagon said there were no civilian casualties, but according to the British human rights group Reprieve, up to 24 civilians died.
The dead included a newborn baby and American 8-year-old girl, Nawar al-Awlaki, the daughter of the U.S.-born cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed in Yemen by a U.S. drone strike in 2011. She's the second child of Anwar al-Awlaki to be killed by the United States in Yemen after her brother, 16-year-old American citizen Abdulrahman al-Awlaki, was killed in a U.S. drone strike in 2011. The U.S. suffered one fatality, William Ryan Owens, a veteran member of SEAL Team 6. Several other Navy SEALs were injured in a fierce firefight. Over a dozen members of al-Qaeda reportedly died as well, and the U.S. lost a $75 million MV-22 Osprey aircraft, which crashed during landing. Plans for the raid began months ago under President Obama. Reuters reports some U.S. military officials say Trump approved the mission without sufficient intelligence, ground support, or adequate backup preparations. Another official told the New York Times, quote, almost everything went wrong. But as recently as Thursday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer claimed the raid a success.
This was a very, very well thought out and executed effort.
Where was the president the night of the raid? How did he learn about Chief Owens' death? And do you still stand by your characterization that it was successful?
The president was here in the residence. He was kept in touch with his national security staff. Secretary Mattis and others had kept him updated on both the raid and the death of Chief Owens, as well as the 4 other individuals that were injured. So he was kept apprised of the situation throughout the evening. And again, I think I would go back to what I said yesterday. It's hard to ever call something a complete success when you have the loss of life or people injured. But I think when you look at the totality of what was gained to prevent the future loss of life here in America, and against our people and our institutions, and probably throughout the world in terms of what some of these individuals could have done, I think it is a successful operation by all standards.
All this comes as thousands of Yemeni Americans and their supporters rallied Thursday in Brooklyn to protest Trump's executive order banning entry to travelers from Yemen and 6 other Muslim-majority nations. For more, we're joined by 3 guests. In London, Baraz Shehban is Yemen project coordinator for Reprieve. She's spoken with residents of the village of Yakla that was raided. Here in New York, Pardis Kabriai, senior staff attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights, represents current and former Guantanamo prisoners. And joining us via Democracy Now! Video stream, Jeremy Scahill, co-founder of The Intercept, host of the new weekly podcast Intercepted. He's the author of The Assassination Complex Inside the Government's Secret Drone Warfare Program. His most recent article, former senior FBI counterterrorism agent slams Trump on torture and Muslim ban. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Jeremy, let us start with you. You've been to Yemen several times. You know the Awlaki family. Can you talk about what you understand took place?
Well, first of all, let's begin with what we understand about how Trump signed off on this covert mission. We understand that in addition to some of his some military officials and, of course, conferring with General James Mattis, that Trump made the decision to greenlight this Navy SEAL raid over dinner with people like Steve Bannon, his white supremacist top advisor, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who has absolutely no experience with these kinds of activities. And what's interesting, before we get to the details of the raid, is that Sean Spicer and the Trump administration tried to imply that the Obama administration and that President Obama himself had greenlit this operation before leaving office, and that they were just waiting for a moonless night so that they could have the cover of darkness to go in. But a former senior official in the Obama administration, Colin Kahl, is saying that that's false, and that the president, the former President Obama, had not actually signed off on this specific raid, but that they had signed off on some of the parameters that the Department of Defense was going to operate under if this raid went ahead, and that the Obama administration viewed this potential raid as an escalation of the U.S. war in Yemen, and that they wanted to defer to the incoming administration, the Trump administration. Now, let's take that with a grain of salt. The Obama administration mercilessly pounded Yemen with bombs since December of 2009, when they launched a cluster bomb attack that killed 36 women and children in the village of Al-Majala, and then repeatedly drone-struck Yemen, and then more recently provided the Saudis with cluster bombs and other munitions, aircraft, to engage in their total destruction, scorched earth campaign inside of Yemen, and also refueling the planes that the Saudis have been using to pummel Yemen, while Samantha Power, Obama's ambassador to the United Nations, was condemning the excesses of the Saudis in Yemen. The United States was, of course, continuing to support the Saudi campaign there. Now, as it relates to this specific raid, we understand that the official story is that the Navy SEALs were being sent in to target senior al-Qaeda people, that they were going to snatch phones and computers and access this valuable intel. And in fact, we have to remember that almost always the initial official responses, and it can go on for days and weeks or months, is either full of half-truths or outright lies. The initial statement on this was that it was this epically successful raid, that no civilians were killed. Yes, a Navy SEAL was killed in a gun battle, but it was worth it to protect the United States and our security because they obtained all this valuable intel. Now, in answering that question, we're also going to address how it was that this 8-year-old girl, Nawar al-Awlaki, was in this compound at the same time. Who was Nawar al-Awlaki? Well, she was the 8-year-old daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki from his third wife. So she was the half-brother of Abdulrahman al-Awlaki, the 16-year-old American citizen.
Half-sister.
The half-sister of Abdulrahman al-Awlaki, the 16-year-old American citizen who was killed in a drone strike as he had dinner with his teenage cousin and others in October of 2011. Awlaki had 4 wives, and this was his third wife. That marriage was a tribally arranged marriage between Anwar al-Awlaki and an influential tribal family, the Dahab family. Why do I bring up this minutia that seems like it would be irrelevant? Well, among the people that were killed in this Navy SEAL raid were 2 brothers, and they were Anwar al-Awlaki's brother-in-laws, who had helped Anwar al-Awlaki escape the first known attempted assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki back in 2011. And they did so by creating a dust circle in the desert with a number of vehicles and then spread out in different directions while al-Awlaki was in one of the vehicles, and al-Awlaki escaped. But so, you know, these guys had been on the U.S. radar for some time, but the idea that they were senior figures within al-Qaeda is just a joke, and a sick one at that, to anyone who actually knows about the inner workings and the structure of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And so this was, I understand from my sources on the ground in Yemen who know the tribal structure well, is that these were low-level foot soldiers basically for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And let's remember that AQAP has long since been capable of organizing any kind of a threat to the United States or U.S. interests. And their primary war right now, ironically, is against the same forces that the Trump administration claims are Iranian proxies, the al-Houthi militias and leaders inside of Yemen. Those are people that al-Qaeda is fighting against while the U.S. supports the Saudis to bomb them. Al-Qaeda also fighting against the southern forces in Yemen. And so, you know, their primary goal right now is not global jihad. It's against the Houthis, against the southern forces in Yemen. And finally, Amy, you know, the U.S. claims, and there was an NBC report that came out last night, that someone had tipped off, you know, al-Qaeda people to the fact that this U.S. raid was imminent. Now, I find that a little bit hard to believe that someone is leaking U.S. intelligence to al-Qaeda, although under this Trump administration, there seems to be a lot of leaks happening. But what they ended up doing was basically just destroying the structures where these people were housed. And so Nawar al-Awlaki, this 8-year-old girl, was there because her mother had returned to her village and to her family after Anwar al-Awlaki was killed. They had been living in Sana'a. So they were there living in their local village. And my understanding from the al-Awlaki family is that Nawar al-Awlaki was, the 8-year-old girl, was shot in the neck, but that she could have been potentially saved and that she was left to bleed out. And, you know, Trump did say, and General Michael Flynn, his national security advisor, they both said in kind of a despicably celebratory way that the families of terrorists are fair game and can be killed. And it's not that Obama's administration didn't kill children and women. It's that they would sort of say, oops, we didn't mean to kill civilians. They didn't really explain why they killed Abdulrahman al-Awlaki, but at least the Obama administration gave the veneer of some remorse about this. Trump's people say that by all standards, this is a success. It's never a success when you have 8-year-old kids and infants being killed, or when you have, Navy SEALs being sent on missions that are not really about the defense of the United States.
Jeremy, it's been widely reported that Nawar is an American citizen. Was she?
Well, I don't think that anyone ever took her to a consulate to get a passport. And the law on this, I would defer to Pardis Kabrai on this. She was born to an American citizen father. Her mother was not an American citizen, as far as I know. I'm almost 100% certain that's true. She had one parent who was an American citizen. I don't think Anwar al-Awlaki would have been able to walk into a consulate to get his daughter American citizenship. But I think that's a question for the lawyer. She definitely had at least one parent who was an American citizen.
And Ryan Owens, the Navy SEAL who was killed, you have a lot of contacts within Navy SEAL Team 6, the significance of this.
Well, these are considered to be the highest end soldiers, the guys who are sent in to do go take down high value targets. They led the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad. But the SEALs are definitely in Camp Trump. There are these pictures that have emerged lately of U.S. military vehicles down near Louisville with current U.S. military vehicles driving around with Trump signs, Trump flags from the back of the vehicles, and Trump often would tout the Navy SEALs on the campaign trail more than other, military units within the U.S. military. And part of that has to do with the kind of Christian crusader, religious supremacist mentality that permeates that community. For people who really want to understand the dark side of this, revered force, I recommend reading my colleague Matthew Cole's excellent series at theintercept.com. And of course, he's been on this show as well. But these are the most expensive soldiers in the U.S. arsenal, and it appears that Trump used them for a mission or authorized them for a mission against some very low-level al-Qaeda people whose primary goal right now is fighting against the same people the U.S. claims to be bombing in Yemen. It's really sick.
I want to bring Bara Shaban into this of Reprieve. Bara, you've been speaking with residents of the village of Yakla that was raided. Tell us what you've learned.
Thank you very much. What we know happened is in almost midnight, the Navy SEAL Team 6 landed in a nearby location, and I'm not sure when they said it was a compound. There was nothing such thing. I know the place myself. I've been there myself when a former drone strike happened in 2013 with a group of I went to with a group of reporters and other human rights workers to investigate that drone strike. It's a small village. You cannot even claim that it's Al-Qaeda headquarters or Al-Qaeda base. It's a small village with very limited services. The people back then were normal villagers. They were just farmers who were working during the day in their farms. So what we know happened is they landed, and then they didn't just raid the house of Abdurrauf al-Dahab, as the Trump administration seems to claim. Actually, they raided the whole village. And if you're in the middle of the night and you raid a village, obviously there's going to be some gunfire. Now, I think Jeremy explained the link with Nawar al-Awlaki, but Nawar is not the only child who killed in this raid. There are 10 children who were killed, 6 women and 8 other villagers. And then we can claim that maybe Abdurrauf al-Dahab and his brother were militants, or we could say combatants. If we exclude them, you're left with 24 civilians who were killed in this raid. I'm not sure what was the aim of this of an operation at this scale, especially that Abdurrauf al-Dahab is not a senior member of Al-Qaeda. His main link towards Al-Qaeda was through his elder brothers, Nabil and Tariq al-Dhahab, and I wouldn't imagine that Al-Qaeda would trust Abdul Rauf with such valuable information as the Trump administration, or like Sean Spicer seems to be suggesting in his press release.
And what is it that was expressed most by the people you spoke to in this village, Bara?
At the first time let me go back a little bit, like in December 2013, people were outraged at the moment and very upset. But actually back then, the Yemeni government apologized to those villagers and gave them compensation and promised them that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen again. Today, when I spoke to the people feel that they are actually targeted. It's not a mistake, as the Obama administration claimed, or what the Yemeni government has been saying. They feel they have been targeted. This village was hit twice. Once a drone strike on a wedding party, and this time it's a raid. And no one understands what was the aim of the raid, especially when they see their women and children were being killed. The one person I spoke to, he said we were very terrified. He had to close his door and told everyone in his family not to leave the house until they realize what's happening out there. He said 2 hours later, and can you imagine in a small village, really 2 hours of constant shooting. He said we went out, and then the literal words he used: bodies everywhere, women, children, everything. Now, interestingly enough, also the groom who survived the drone strike on his wedding in December 2013 was killed along with his son and daughter in this raid. I'm not sure how can they explain this. I know the area myself. The house that they claim was Al-Qaeda based. That's a two-room story house, very small. There is nothing I would say is much big of a value. If I would claim that Abdul Rauf was the target of the raid, maybe they were trying to get him, to arrest him and get him alive. How can you explain the death of 24 civilians just to get one person?
Pardis Kabriai, you're a senior staff attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights. Yemen's Foreign Minister Abdul Malik al-Maflaki condemned the raid in a Twitter post as extrajudicial killings. What's your understanding about the legality of what just happened and your thoughts on how soon into Trump's presidency it's happened?
I think the strike or the raid was of questionable legality. There are clearly questions about the legality, about the intelligence, about the process, about the impact that need to be asked and answered. There have been calls for a briefing on the Hill by members of Congress. There have been calls by other human rights groups for an investigation. There must be an investigation and an explanation of what happened on legal, political, human, and security levels. So it's hard right now to, sort of come to a conclusion about exactly what happened because the government needs to say more. The administration needs to say more. There needs to be accountability now. Given that this was the first raid in Yemen by the Trump administration, and given that there are clear signs that this is an administration that wants to escalate the use of raids, the use of drones, the use of war-making in Yemen and elsewhere. So there needs to be accountability and a check right now before we go further. I would also say, as Jeremy pointed out, there needed to be accountability before. These are authorities that were claimed by the Obama administration, that were continued from the Bush administration, claimed by the Obama administration, a program of killing through drones, through raids that has been going on for years. And accountability is important not just when you have a constitutional, not just when you have a president like Trump, but when you have a constitutional law professor like President Obama as well. And accountability did not really happen, did not happen meaningfully under the former administration. Politically, publicly, or through the courts. I mean, we're seeing now, for example, with the Muslim ban, how essential the role of the courts is in checking sweeping ostensibly unlawful executive power. There were attempts at judicial accountability in the past under the Obama administration with the drone program, and the courts failed to exercise judicial scrutiny at that point. So it's critical.
I'm curious, Barak Shehban, are you affected by the Muslim ban? We are speaking to right now in London.
I think that's a really good question. Me myself, right now, I can't go to visit my Reprieve colleagues in the U.S. That's effectively what the Muslim ban has done. Not only that, actually, but we in Reprieve have invited before relatives of drone strike victims to the United States, and we have arranged for them meetings to meet and talk to congressmen and senators inside the U.S. So they can talk to each other. Basically, we brought Faisal bin Ali Jabir, who is a relative of a drone victim. He was able to sit and meet with congressmen. And effectively, what we were trying to do in Reprieve is just encourage that dialogue to happen. People need to talk to each other. They need to hear those voices. And effectively, what the Trump administration has done with this ban is shut down that door of dialogue, saying we don't want to talk to anyone. We're going to deal with everyone outside the U.S. as aliens, and that's it. I'm not sure how this is going to help the security of the United States when you're willing not to talk to people anymore. But basically, this is what's been doing. And it's not just me, but actually the thousands of Yemeni people who have their relatives maybe outside at the moment of the ban, now they can't go back into the country.
Finally, Jeremy Scahill, Stephen Bannon was with President Trump when he okayed the raid, apparently. Can you talk about the significance of this?
Well, Stephen Bannon and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and First Lady, as she appears to be now, Ivanka Trump's husband. Look, the fact is that Steve Bannon is a dangerous, extreme right-wing ideologue. Yes, he is a former member of the United States Navy, but his life's work is promoting fear-mongering against immigrants, and promoting what I think can rightly be called a white supremacist agenda. And let's be clear here. Donald Trump's administration will lie about aerial photos from his inauguration and what they show. You think they're going to tell the truth about the details of a covert raid in Yemen that killed women and children and got a U.S. Navy SEAL killed? Let's look at their actual response in the bigger picture. We learned yesterday that Gina Haspel is going to be the deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency. She was one of the people that ran a CIA black site where prisoners were mercilessly tortured, waterboarded, etc. And she, we understand, was the agent who led the destruction of the CIA torture tapes at the direction of the main torture ringleader, Jose Rodriguez, at the Central Intelligence Agency. That is the person who now is going to be the #2 at Donald Trump's CIA. And Susan Rice, Obama's ambassador to the UN, and all these other Democrats are up in arms because a Republican was bragging about her being, the first woman to be named to such a high position, and that, in fact, Obama had also named a woman to a high position in the CIA. The objection is not the black site, not the torture, not the destruction of tapes, but that there was gender equality somehow under Obama, and now Trump has picked this woman. I mean, that's the state where we're at now in our discussion about these policies. The fact is that Trump's administration, Islamophobes, billionaires, bigots, and torture lovers.
I want to thank you all for being with us. Jeremy Scahill of The Intercept, Barak Shehban of Reprieve in London, and Pardis Kabriai of the Center for Constitutional Rights. You can go to our website to hear some of the voices of more than 1,000 small grocery store owners and workers across New York who went on strike Thursday in the latest protest against President Trump's immigration order. When we come back, we'll speak with a transgender reporter who was just fired from the public radio show Marketplace. Stay with us.
My skin glows in the dark, shines in the light, so color that won't speak high. stretching the show as tough as it goes, and it won't rub off of you.
It's My Brown Skin, El Lado Negro, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to the story of a reporter who wrote a blog post about journalistic neutrality under President Donald Trump and found himself out of a job. Until last week, Lewis Wallace was the only out transgender reporter at the public radio show Marketplace. Then he published a blog post on the website Medium about journalistic neutrality and the challenges of being a transgender journalist who covers the current administration. Under the headline, "Objectivity is Dead, and I'm okay with it," he questioned whether people who hold, quote, morally reprehensible positions, such as supporting white supremacy, can be covered objectively. And he argued journalists shouldn't care if they're called politically correct or liberal. He also wrote, quote, "After years of silence denial about our existence, the media's finally picked up trans stories. But the nature of the debate is over whether or not we should be allowed to live and participate in society, use public facilities, and expect not to be harassed, fired, or even killed," unquote. Marketplace said Wallace's blog post violated its code of ethics. It suspended him for writing it and asked him to take it down. When he later republished it, he was fired. For more, Lewis Wallace joins us here in our New York studio. But first, I want to read the response from Marketplace's Director of Communications, Angie Anderson. She said they don't discuss personnel matters about current or former employees, but she gave us a statement that, quote, "The broader issue around journalistic ethics is an ongoing one for the industry. For Marketplace, it's very clear. We're committed to raising the economic intelligence of all Americans. We accomplish that with independent and objective reporting that's based on facts, pursues the truth, and covers what's happening in a fair and neutral way. Our journalists' mission is to be honest, impartial, nonpartisan, and independent in their work. Our team is a diverse group of professionals who have committed to that code of ethics," unquote. That's the statement from Marketplace about the firing of Lewis Wallace. Lewis, your response.
Well, it's a really sort of complicated series of events that went on that led to me losing my job. But fundamentally, I think a lot of journalists all over the country in public radio stations and in other types of organizations as well are thinking really seriously about where is the center, where is our moral compass, and how are we going to report on an administration that assertively pushes lies, talks about ideas like alternative facts. I never did a story for Marketplace that was accused of bias or of being partial or unethical. This was more of a big picture discussion that I wanted to carry on with other journalists. That discussion is going on now, and I'm really happy to see that that's happening. And I think that the sad thing has been learning from a lot of other journalists around the country that they're afraid to raise these questions, and in particular, journalists of color or transgender journalists who are in newsrooms that are mostly white, where journalistic decisions are being made from sort of a certain perspective, and we're all aware that that perspective affects how we cover stories. We should cover them truthfully, we should cover them fairly, but I still think we should be questioning kind of the meaning of neutrality in this time, and a lot of people want to have that conversation, and they shouldn't have to be afraid to have it.
Well, we're going to continue the conversation after the show, and we're going to post it online at democracynow.org. Our guest, Lewis Wallace, fired from the national radio outlet Marketplace on Monday after posting on his personal blog about journalistic neutrality and the challenges of being a transgender journalist in this era of alternative facts. That does it for our show. We'll also link to his piece. Very happy birthday to Hugh Grant. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gaddis-Diener, Dina Guzder, Sam Alcoff, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadura, Andre Lewis, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Paul Huckabee are our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grant, David Prude. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.